Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. A plea from the leaders of Red Earth and Shoal Lake Cree Nations to keep your children safe. The Chiefs joined the family of 5-year-old Frank Young today to say thank you for all the support they received over the 81 days of the search. APTN's Leanne Sanders reports.
Family members stood in a show of unity wearing bright orange shirts bearing a picture of Frank and the Paw Patrol characters he loved. The grief is still raw for the family 4 days after Frank's body was found, just 2 kilometers from where he went missing. RCMP say the area of the Carrot River where he was discovered is full of deadfall trees and had been well searched. An autopsy is being conducted today, although the RCMP says there was no sign of foul play on the boy's body or clothing. The family is making plans for a traditional wake and funeral this weekend. Addressing all the financial donations they've received, the Chiefs say a memorial is in the works for the small boy, whose disappearance on April 19th brought communities and people from across the country together. Chief Marcel Head of Shoal Lake Cree Nation says every child matters, and Frank Young mattered. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Prince Albert.
The RCMP has seriously undercounted the number of murdered Indigenous women in Quebec. That's according to a researcher from the Ishkwe Project in Montreal. She says it's because of systemic racism, something Quebec's provincial government says doesn't exist. Here's Amelia Fournier to explain further.
The problem is that there's a lack of wanting to know if these Indigenous women have been murdered or have been missing and how many.
Janice Kavavok-Bibo is looking for missing and murdered Indigenous women who have slipped through the cracks. She's the research coordinator for the Ishkwe Project, a support center and research base for Indigenous women in Quebec.
Passing by the traditional way, by police stations, is a really long and difficult process, and it's often like we don't have much answers, so I had to get creative.
And by getting creative means she had to use archival research and reach out to communities. The result? She identified almost 100 murdered Indigenous women in Quebec from 1980 to 2012, whereas the RCMP reported 46 for that same time period. And that's what Quebec uses when it reports the latest data.
I have a lot of data, but I wonder how much data if I would really have if the coroners, if the police, if everybody really wanted to dig in these findings and these murders to know if was it really suicide? Was it really drug overdose?
She is continually updating her database of murdered Indigenous women in Quebec and wants to eventually create an interactive map of missing and murdered Indigenous women in the province. Kavavok-Bibo has also included what she calls systemic deaths in her case counts. Like Joyce Echequan, who filmed healthcare workers saying racist remarks while she died uncared for in hospital. 2 systemic deaths were included in her 1980 to 2012 count.
The Legault government doesn't even want to admit to systemic racism, and it's really a problem. Like Joyce Echequan is not a particular case. This is something that happens more frequently than we think. It's just that the clients don't necessarily have a phone to film.
She said that investigations are often cut short when Indigenous women are involved, even if family members or loved ones say otherwise.
Just dealing with police is a really stressful situation, but dealing with police and not even being taken seriously, like that's really heartbreaking. Like if the people that are supposed to help you are not helping you, who's gonna help you? So that's when we come in.
She also answers Ishkwe's hotline and accompanies Indigenous people in Quebec with their dealings with the police.
Yes, what's the name of the person who's missing?
Kavavok-Bibo has helped Indigenous people outside of Quebec with the RCMP after they called Ishkwe's hotline.
They don't have funding for Ishkwe projects in their provinces, so it's something that is needed everywhere in Canada.
The RCMP, Quebec's Justice Ministry, and Quebec's Public Security Ministry were not available for interviews before deadline. Amelia Fournier, APTN National News, Montreal.
On Vancouver Island, logging protests near Fairy Creek have started again after a quiet winter and spring. Environmental groups reestablished camps and blockades to try to protect old-growth trees. and the RCMP are making arrests. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
Late last week, RCMP stated they made arrests at a protest camp on a forestry road on Vancouver Island. They added that leaders from Pacheedaht First Nations, Dididat, and Hooayat spent several months trying to ask protest groups to leave the area in order for the logging to continue in their traditional territories. But an elder from Pacheedaht, William Jones, as the leader of the group opposed to the old-growth logging. He says the Fairy Creek area and Granite Creek are culturally significant.
It's a place of important spiritual and cultural value that is very important to my people. And it is a place, a reservoir of our past integrity.
Losa, or Rose Henry, as an elder from APTN Nation. She's been at Fairy Creek providing support for nearly 2 years. She says 2 young women from Pacheedaht Nation have been on the ground leading the fight against old-growth logging on Vancouver Island.
No, it's like a part of my teachings are, like to respond to our youth, because it's their future that they're trying to save.
APTN reached out to the 3 First Nations, but did not receive a response. The battle around Fairy Creek is into its 3rd year, with blockades first going up in the spring of 2020. Logging company Teal Jones has a revenue sharing agreement with Pacheedaht First Nation. Last year, they secured an injunction against blockades and Tree Farm License 46, which covers a large area on southern Vancouver Island. In a public statement, the company stated Fairy Creek watershed as a small portion of their licensed area, and they are not logging it. More than half of the old growth within TFL 46 is protected in old growth management areas and other areas as appropriate. There are some sensitive wildlife habitats in TFL, including the Fairy Creek watershed. They are protected. You may hear claims from blockaders that Teal Jones plans to harvest in protected areas regardless, but that is baseless. These areas are protected by law, and we respect them. Joshua Wright is an environmentalist who's been working to raise awareness about Fairy Creek. He shared recent footage of the valleys around Fairy Creek and old-growth forest since the start of the protest. He says he stood on old-growth stumps set for deferral in the area.
I was on the ground in an area that was identified for deferral a couple months ago. It was identified for deferral. It was supposed to receive protection. And I was standing on stumps that were, 8, 9, 10 feet thick. And, that's really what we're seeing just across the board is area after area that was supposed to receive protection, not receive protection.
Teal Jones says most of what they're cutting is second growth trees. And half of the old growth in their southern Vancouver Island tree farm license is protected. Some of the groups against the logging state they want old growth logging to stop in BC to help battle climate change, while others like Elder William Jones focus on protecting old growth forests on Vancouver Island.
And Fairy Creek and a few places up island, at the north end of the island, they're now realizing that the last of the old growth forest is it. It's the last. And we have to save the last.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
Still in BC, this week 4 First Nations celebrated self-government agreements on education. They give them control over such things as teacher certification, curriculum, and graduation requirements in K-12 schools. The celebration took place on the Seabird Island First Nation, 130 kilometers east of Vancouver. Various speakers talked about the long road BC First Nations have traveled to gain control over education, including signed agreements with federal and provincial governments in 2006. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller was also on hand.
We know, and there are proof points to this, that when you control your own education as a matter of inherent right and as a matter of self-determination, the results are equal to in measurables and graduation rates to non-Indigenous education, and in fact exceed them.
With the Assembly of First Nations annual general meeting over, where does the organization go next? That and much more coming up after the break. The AFN's annual General Assembly is now in the rearview mirror. To discuss how the group moves forward, I'm joined by APTN's Brett Forrester in Ottawa. He turned up documents last week offering a detailed, exclusive look at all this recent turmoil. Brett, good to see you. Can you tell us what got you pulling on the threads that led to this behind-the-scenes story?
So, as we all know, the National Chief, Roseanne Archibald, had been making public allegations of what she called corruption and collusion for days and approaching weeks, but she refused to disclose the specifics of what those allegations are. And so I started looking in places where I figured those specifics might be. Court documents are a logical place to look. Every good reporter knows you can often find evidence and information in court documents that you couldn't find elsewhere. And in the court documents, I learned that National Chief Archibald planned to file an affidavit with exhibits in court laying out her case, but she never did file it. So eventually, as I kept looking, I obtained this briefing package that was sent to chiefs across Canada that contained allegations the AFN executive hid a quote-unquote financial irregularity in which a senior AFN staff allegedly transferred nearly $200,000 in AFN cash into their personal bank account and then was terminated without cause when it was discovered. This package also contained confidential emails sent more recently by AFN staffers that were obtained by the National Chief, along with a confidential chronology sent by the National Chief to chiefs across Canada, laying out her case as to why they should vote in her favor at the AGA, but taken together it painted a very detailed portrait of what's been going on there behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Brett, how did all the parties involved respond to the report?
Well, the response to this story has been muted, which shouldn't really surprise anybody. You know, this story contained the word confidential, and I just use the word confidential, I think, more times than I ever have in any other story. So these are contentious allegations. They are unproven. There are mutual accusations swirling, and they've been made behind the scenes, and they contain details as are laid out in a confidential briefing note shared with the chiefs that could cause quote-unquote reputational harm to the AFN. So the AFN did not comment until after that story was posted, and their comment was essentially that they couldn't comment. And that's, for one, because the chiefs had passed a resolution calling for a forensic audit, which may or may not take a look into these allegations. And the National Chief's Office also refused to confirm nor deny the authenticity of these documents, and also refused further comment.
Getting hard to get a comment out of anybody over at the AFN lately. Where does the AFN go from here? How do you see this playing out over the next few months?
Well, I think First Nations people probably want to see the AFN get away from some of this infighting and get back to the issues themselves. There's a number of huge issues on the AFN's plate right now that need strong leadership, but there are a few things that need to get resolved before that could happen. The first is the HR probe, the third-party investigation into the complaints against the National Chief. That's still going on, and so while she may have survived a non-confidence vote at the AGA, there is still this pending probe which may or may not rule against her. So she's got to deal with that on the side, and that's going to consume quite a bit of time. The second thing, obviously, is the forensic audit. The chiefs voted in support of a resolution calling for a forensic audit, and this was something that the National Chief had been demanding. But as we've seen lately, getting support for this National Chief, it's been easier to get support from the chiefs for certain elements of her mandate than it has been to get that mandate implemented around the executive committee table, which consists of the regional chiefs. And that's another big question. Forensic audits are serious. They're usually used to determine criminal culpability in cases where there's been alleged criminal corruption. So they're very expensive, sometimes prohibitively so. So the question now is, how does she get a forensic audit implemented, and how does she get the regional chiefs on board with something like that?
Speaking of the regional chiefs, what are they saying now?
Well, Dennis, you indicated earlier that it's not been easy to get comment out of the AFN these days, and that certainly seems to be the case here. I have reached out to every single member of the AFN Executive Committee seeking comment just generally on what happens next, and I will certainly keep everybody apprised if I hear anything over the next few days.
Brett, appreciate your reporting on this and speaking with us about it today.
Thanks, Dennis.
Still to come, a profile of a Cree musician who has just released a new album and video. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Ernie shared this close-up shot of a lily in Mississippi's Cree Nation. Thanks for sharing, Ernie. If you want to be featured as our photo of the day, email your shots to share@aptn.ca along with a location and description. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 28 with showers for Halifax, rain, and 27 in Fredericton. Showers and 18 in Kuujjuaq, rain in Nain, and a high of 10. 26 for Montreal, 21 in Val-d'Or. Sunny and 22 for Sault Ste. Marie, rain and 22 in North Bay. 22 under the sun for Thunder Bay, 24 in Sioux Lookout. In northern Manitoba, 27 and sunny for God's Lake. 28 under the sun in Winnipeg, sunny and 29 in Dauphin. 31 in Regina, 35 for Saskatoon. 32 in Meadow Lake and in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, 23 with showers in High Level and Fort McMurray. 31 with rain in Lethbridge and Calgary. Rain and 21 in Vancouver, 30 and sunny for Kamloops. 19 with showers in Prince George, 18 in Smithers. 16 with rain in Old Crow and Whitehorse. 22 in Yellowknife, 19 with showers for Norman Wells. 20 in Sax Harbor, a high of 12 for Paulatuck. Sunny and 20 in Whale Cove, 26 in Chesterfield, 14 in Resolute, 8 in Clyde River. A new exhibit in Southern Ontario gives some insight into some of the people and artistry involved in a summertime tradition, the Powwow. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
Museum curator Claire Bennett puts the finishing touches on this current exhibition at the Peel Art Gallery in Brampton, Ontario. It's called Regalia, Indigenous Pride, and it just opened to the public last week.
Because powwow is part of culture here, it's part of Indigenous culture. It's fabulous to be able to showcase the resurgence of Indigenous culture and the celebration that is powwow throughout the summer.
It's a vibrant exhibit featuring a small display of beadwork from the early 1800s to the current work of 5 Indigenous artists. Bennett says it's important to show how traditions continue.
Because I think that there is an interest in Indigenous culture from non-Indigenous peoples throughout Peel, and there's such a long history of Indigenous culture and livelihood within Peel that it's important for us to showcase all aspects of indigeneity, whether it's the history or the artistry and contemporary culture today.
The photographic exhibit features the work of 2 non-native powwow enthusiasts as well.
Regalia was developed by Roland Laurent and Aline Sefor, their photographer and writer team based out of Montreal, and they took it upon themselves over 5 years to travel 10,000 kilometers across eastern Canada, visiting powwows across multiple nations throughout Quebec, Ontario, and New Brunswick.
It was an opportunity to educate and share the beauty of the powwow trail.
Roland and Eileen it was really important to them to get permission from the dancers to photograph them. So at each powwow, they would sit with the dancers, photograph them within circle, and then interview them. So you'll see people with full dressed in their regalia, mid-dance, alongside their quotes and themselves in kind of street clothes. So taking first-person accounts of what powwow means to people.
The exhibit will be on display until October 30th. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Brampton.
Alberta-born Ashley Ghostkeeper is a rising country music artist, and she's just now released her debut music video. APTN's Chris Stewart talks with the talented singer-songwriter.
You call me up on a Saturday night. I hear a sweet voice. Boy, you say my name just right. Give me a...
Ashley Ghostkeeper is from Red Deer, Alberta, and now calls Calgary her home. The Métis Cree artist has been writing and performing since she was 8 years old. And now she is celebrating the release of her debut music video, Waitin' on a No. She says her songs pull from her personal life, and that helps people connect with her.
So I really like to stick to just that very organic, down-to-earth kind of truth-telling, and I write from my own experiences and I put that down on paper.
Her style is similar to country music from the 90s and into the early 2000s. She wrote Waiting on a No from a past relationship and is excited to bring it alive in a music video.
I wrote this song a few years ago on a true story, and to bring that to life with visuals was really, really awesome, to give the best to the viewers, the listeners, to really showcase this story of two, I guess, lovers where it didn't really work out and they were waiting on a no, they were waiting on that rejection, waiting on that goodbye.
Wait on that last keys, wait on that last please. Oh, I'm here waiting on a no.
When I think of the song, it's a very positive song for me, when one might think it's a heartbreak song, but really it's not. It's more of like healing a heartbreak for me. So I hope that people can relate to this.
The song is from her debut EP released last year. It peaked on the Indigenous Music Countdown for the week of March 4th at number 5. She says more songs and videos will be coming in the future.
There's still 2 more to be released. I've just been releasing one at a time, and all the songs are solely written by me, and I wanted it to be that way just to really show people who I am and what I have to say and my story, and kind of go on this like healing journey with me. As you know, I'm still young, I'm still learning.
Waiting on a no, waiting on this goodbye, waiting for this heartache.
Her music is available for streaming on the major platforms. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Good stuff, Ashley. Country music from the 90s, that's where it was at. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Stick around. Coming up next, an encore presentation of Face to Face, where we sit down with Cassidy Caron, the president of the Métis National Council. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.